Thank you all for being here. We are in a building that was very busy a week ago. It's less busy today, but I think what happened here on Thursday of last week is still echoing around the state and frankly around the country. It has been very inspiring to see so many Hoosiers stand up and speak out about their desire for us to have fair elections. Our group was founded in September. We were created because a group of committed Hoosiers felt like things were not going in the right direction for our state. And the number one problem that we determined was sort of at the root of what we've been struggling with is the fact that we, in most parts of the state, no longer have competitive general elections. We went back and looked at the data from the last two election cycles in 2023 and 2024, and what we found was surprising in a really positive way. Across the state of Indiana, people are running for office as independents, and they're doing surprisingly well. I spoke with a former Republican state party chair to ask him how many independents getting on the ballot for partisan races would signal that there's something happening around the state. This person said if 50 independents had run in 2023 and 2024, that would shock them. The number was 244. That same chair guessed that 5% of them won their races. It was 52%. Something's happening in the state, but most people don't know about it. That's why Independent Indiana was formed. And part of us tackling this problem is really getting our hands around how big of an issue it really is, examining the root causes, talking to people inside the two major parties about what's really going on, and examining different paths to reform. So we commissioned a study, included some statewide polling. We're going to share that information with you here. The study is over 50 pages. It's available on our website for download in about 4 minutes. And I encourage all of you, after you leave here today, to go download the study, read through it, reach out to us if anything in there strikes you as something that you want to help us be a part of. Again, you will be joining a very, very large majority of Hoosiers who, again, according to our polling, are ready for something different. It's not so much a critique of the people who are in our politics right now. There's a lot of good folks, Republicans, Democrats, independents, libertarians, but the system has become calcified in a way that's really not healthy for our state. The good news is, 250 years ago, a lot of very wise people declared our independence from a country that was treating us as subjects so that the people of America could be citizens. Sadly, many of us are starting to feel more like subjects, but there is hope for us to become citizens once again. So I want to thank you again for coming, and I want to start going through some of the things that we found in our study. Let's go ahead and look at the first slide here. So we talk a lot about the lack of competitive elections in the state. I want to talk about what that actually means on a practical level. So these are the last 3 cycles of state house and state senate races. And you can see that in 2024, not a single one changed party. In 2022, several changed, but several of those were districts that were redrawn specifically for candidates of the other party. And in our study, we talk about one of them. It's up in Fort Wayne, where a Republican state legislator had been challenged by a Democrat and was getting closer to losing each time. And so after the census in 2020, we spoke with several Republican insiders who told us that the party drew a seat for that Democratic challenger so that the Republican wouldn't have to sweat that race anymore. So sometimes the turnover that we see is actually still a factor of sort of the calcification of the party control. We have not had a change in party in one of our members of Congress since 2012. That was when Jackie Walorski won a seat that had been drawn by the Republican state legislature to be more favorable to her. We have not had a change in a statewide office since 2018 when Mike Braun beat Joe Donnelly for the US Senate. So it has been years and years since we've seen a change at the statewide level, certainly a long time since we've seen a change on the congressional level. And I think if you paid attention to the discussion and the debate in the last few weeks, it was very clear that the reason why certain people thought the maps needed to be redrawn is because they understood that absent that, the party holding that seat is very unlikely to change. When you do not have competitive elections, the primaries become the determinative factor in who represents us. The Indiana Secretary of State's office keeps track of turnout in primaries, but it does not keep track of them for parties. And so based on the number of votes cast in each party's primary in the largest races, in the statewide races, we were able to estimate the following numbers. So you can see here that 13% of Hoosier voters are the ones determining who the Republican nominees for statewide office are in the last few cycles. Those are the voices that our Republican statewide elected officials are focused on serving. They're the voices that they're listening to, and that is a very, very small minority of all of the voters in this state. The Democratic primary is an even smaller percentage, as you can see. Again, when we don't have competitive general elections, these 13% of Republicans, the 4% that are Democrats, those are the ones who have an outsized impact, not just in who becomes our elected officials, but how they govern. We had a suspicion that the voters in Indiana are actually not as extreme as some of the people who represent them. And because those people represent them, the legislation that's coming out of this building is reflecting some of those extreme views. We did a poll of over 600 registered voters in the state, and we asked them, what are the issues that are very important to you when you're voting in state and local elections? So I want you to just take a second and look at those numbers. So the number one issue on that chart is reducing government corruption and increasing transparency. So over 80% of Hoosier voters say that that's very important to them when voting in state and local elections. The second thing on there is keeping schools safe and preventing gun violence. And if you download our study, you will see that not only is it in the high 80s for Hoosier voters across the board, it's in the high 80s for Republican voters as well. The third item on there is affordability. It's reducing the costs of gas, groceries, housing. These are all in the 80s for people across the board. These are not the 13% who are determining Republican primary, the 4 or 5% that are determining the Democratic primary. These are the priorities that Hoosiers say are most important to them. But again, when you don't have competitive general elections, that is not becoming the priority of our legislators. And look, in fairness to them, they are trying to win primaries so that they can keep their seats and do the work that they want to do. I think we sometimes have a tendency to blame our elected officials instead of understanding there are very complicated incentives that are pushing them, in many cases, in directions towards extremism and away from these key issues that are most important to Hoosiers. And it is our job as citizens to help change those incentives. We're all in this together. This is not about casting blame on people who have taken up the idea that they want to serve people. It is hard to run for office. There are people in this room right now who know that. They've run for office. They've won. I've run. I haven't won. I know how hard it is to run. I don't know how hard it is to serve. It is a difficult thing, and we should thank our elected officials and the people who run as candidates for doing that. It's our job to help change the system so that they can do the things that privately many of them tell us they want to be doing. So we talked about the top three issues. Now I want to talk about the bottom three. So again, we gave the people that we polled a whole panel of issues. The bottom three: laws concerning abortion in Indiana, closing the border and illegal immigration, and laws concerning transgender athletes in Indiana. Now, if you've been paying attention to what's been coming out of the State House the last few years, you would think that those were the top three issues. That is not where the majority of Hoosier voters are. We went from the 80s now to at the bottom here in the 40s and 30s. It is so important that we return competitive general elections to the state so that our legislature has the freedom to focus on those issues that are affecting Hoosiers and that are most important to them. So let's talk about how those Hoosier voters see our two parties right now. You can see here that only 33% of Hoosier voters have a favorable opinion of the Republican Party. And this polling was done before the redistricting fight really got heated. I would actually suspect that that number may have shifted and it could be even smaller today. Although I do think that with the vote on Thursday, you've got some people who are disappointed. You probably have a similar number who are heartened. Let's look at the Democratic number. So the Democratic number is only 25% favorable, and you can see even amongst Democrats, people who identify as Democrats, it's only at 2/3. So the people are telling us they're not happy with the two parties. So we asked them specifically, do you think the two-party system leaves out the views of too many people? And by more than 3-to-1 margin, they say yes. So that includes Republicans, Democrats, and certainly independents. Even though our state is dominated by the Republican Party, even though portions of it are dominated by the Democratic Party, a large majority of Hoosiers think that there are too many people's voices that are being left out. And again, it's a function more of the system than any individual. So very clear, and it makes sense that a majority of voters are going to be dissatisfied with their choices of candidates in Indiana elections. Well, that number is different, obviously, for the Republicans. They're going to be more happy with their candidates because they're the ones that are winning most of the elections. But you can see people are not happy. And if you're sitting at home or if you're in the audience here today and you have been dissatisfied with the choices of candidates, just know that you're not alone. So now we want to talk about some of the things that are creating a system that's making it challenging for independents to run and be successful in larger offices. So there's a section in the study that talks about the barriers. And the main barriers, the first one is straight ticket voting. Indiana is one of only 6 states that still has straight ticket voting. And what that means is for a whole lot of people, they walk into the voting booth, they click straight ticket, they don't even know if an independent or a non-major party candidate is running. They don't even see those names on the ballot. The Secretary of State's office does not keep tabs, does not calculate, does not keep records of how many people vote straight ticket statewide, but we went through and looked at the top 5 largest counties in the state, and over 50% of voters in the last election in those counties voted straight ticket. A lot of people also don't know about the signature requirement that is different for independents than for major party candidates. So if you're running for statewide office as an independent, you have to get 8 times as many signatures as Republicans or Democrats do who are running for U.S. Senate and for governor. If you're running for Congress, independents have to get thousands of signatures. Republicans and Democrats only need 1, their own. We asked Hoosier voters if they think that those signature requirements are fair. You can see very clearly across the board and across all parties, they know that this is an unfair requirement. And the history of this requirement is actually very interesting. There's a whole section in our study on it. So currently it is, you have to get 2% of the number of votes cast in the most recent Secretary of State election in whatever district you want to run in. For statewide office, it goes to end up being about 36,000 signatures that you need. Cost of that is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But that signature requirement used to be 0.5%. It was quadrupled in the 1980 legislative session. And the reason it was quadrupled is because there was a representative from Michigan City whose friend had run for mayor. The friend won the Democratic primary, was going to then coast to the election. Somebody filed to run as an independent. The friend beat the independent, but This legislator was so upset that he decided in a blatantly vindictive mood to quadruple the signature requirement. And we actually have joining us later today one of the legislators who tried to stop that bill. He's actually on his way to the State House right now. He's caught in traffic. His name is Mitch Harper, and he filed an affidavit in a lawsuit several years ago explaining everything that happened. He's happy to talk to the press once he gets here. It is crazy that a vendetta from 45 years ago is making it so hard for people who weren't even born then to run as independents today in the state of Indiana. Can we go back to the previous slide? I just want to note, so the straight ticket voting one, people don't think that straight ticket voting is a good thing. And over the last few legislative sessions, multiple Republicans, state senators, and state representatives have filed bills to repeal straight ticket voting. But those bills have not ever gotten out of committee. So there is already an interest amongst legislators to do this. There's clearly an appetite from Hoosiers around the state. So we'll get into this when we get to our recommendations in the study, but we think that getting rid of straight ticket voting would be an incredibly positive thing for voters and also for candidates. Okay, so we talked about some of these barriers. It is very clear when we ask voters whether they think things should be easier for independents to run for office in the state. Overwhelmingly, yes. Across all demographics, across all partisan persuasions, they understand once you inform them of what the barriers are, they recognize these things are not fair. These things do not create a situation where we have elections where people have a real chance to run and to win. Let's go to the next slide. And here's the most interesting thing that we found. If people had a chance to vote for an independent who they thought was viable, who they thought had a chance to win, and they matched with on most issues, an overwhelming majority of Hoosier voters would cast their ballot for that person. That was really, really interesting and also helped explain to us why those 244 independents had been so successful, why half of them won their elections the last two cycles. Because at those levels, so they're winning for mayor, they're winning for city council, they're winning for clerk treasurer, these barriers are not as burdensome. It's easier to overcome straight ticket voting. It's easier to get the signatures when it's a smaller race. But again, there's nothing unique, according to the people that we surveyed, for them when they vote in a local election versus a state election, a state legislative election. The challenge is those burdens that we talked about. So I think the next section here is when we get into those recommendations. So the first recommendation that the study makes is to repeal straight ticket voting. Again, I mentioned that multiple state legislators have filed bills in recent years. We think that signals that there is some momentum, but now that we have the polling data, certainly our organization is going to try to partner with others. We've had preliminary conversations with people in the business community who understand how important this would be. And again, we are one of only 6 states that still has straight ticket voting. It's going the way of the dodo, and I don't want people to think that here in Indiana we're bird brains. All right, the next one is to restore the signature requirements for independent candidates to those pre-1980 levels. When we know for a fact why a bad law was passed and we can undo that, we've got people who are still around willing to testify in front of some of these legislative committees. I think we have an obligation to do what we can to try to talk to some of those state legislators and see if we can convince them to carry a bill so that we can modify that. And speaking of, this man here in the tan coat is Mitch Harper, who I mentioned earlier. He is the one who filed that affidavit and was here in 1980 in these very halls trying to prevent the quadrupling of the signature requirements. He wasn't successful back in 1980, but hopefully working together with a coalition of Hoosiers, we can be successful in the coming session. And the final thing, we heard from independent candidates across the state and people who had thought of running for as independents about the lack of resources, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of a knowledge base that a party does provide. And we think that it is imperative that for people to run for office as independents and have a real shot, we need to help build that infrastructure. A combination of groups like ours, which is a 501c4 nonprofit, political action committees, and other interested parties, we feel like we can be a convener of the people who want to help with this. And we've already started having preliminary conversations with folks around the state. So That's the end of the slide presentation. Thanks for paying attention. I feel like I was in the lecture portion of this. I want to introduce two board members. So Independent Indiana is a project of the 501c4 nonprofit, the Center for Independent and Effective Government. And two of our board members are here today. The first one I want to introduce you to is Amar Patel. Amar Patel is our vice chair. Amar, if you could come up, please. And I also want to introduce Jay Chaudhary. Jay is the treasurer of the Center for Independent and Effective Government. So we're going to let Amar actually take over. He's formerly led Teach for America in Indianapolis, is great at asking questions. So we're going to let him ask some questions to Jay and I about some of the insights and the things that we found out during the study.
Thank you, Nathan, and it's good to see so many of you here today and so many dear friends. Nathan, you hit on this, that among the most surprising findings in the study was that we've had a large number of independents run for office over the past two election cycles in 2023 and 2024, and not just a large number, larger than most long-standing, decades-long political operatives would have ever guessed, but that a majority are winning. Could you tell us a bit about these leaders? When you spend time with them, when you get to know what's their why, what do they want to get done, why are they running against all kinds of odds, and what are they accomplishing?
Yeah, so I'll try to answer all those questions. The first thing that you discover when you reach out to these people is a lot of them think they're the only ones in the state who have done this. And what's really interesting is they all have three things in common. The first is a real sense of integrity and humility. They're running because they care about public service. I had one person say to me, look, if I was doing this for my ego, I'd run as a Republican. It'd be a whole lot easier. But then I would have to do things and say things that I don't agree with and I don't think are the best things for the people that I want to represent. The second thing is they really understand that they need to balance being fiscally responsible while also making sure that government works. I had one person say, look, there's things that government can do better than the private sector, and we need to be doing it, and we need to be doing it better. But we also need to be making sure that we're being very respectful of the tax dollars that we're bringing in. So we have to have both of those things in balance. And the final thing that I hear from them over and over again is a real focus on problem solving. I think we have a tendency to feel like our politicians have kind of gotten away from that. But these independents that I talk to, they tell me, look, I don't have the luxury of blaming our problems on the other side. There is no other side. If I'm not fixing things or making progress on them, I'm not going to get reelected. And so those are the things that I see that they have in common. We've also seen there's a lot of former Republican elected officials who are now running and winning as independents. And I think that there is a tendency for us to assume that independent candidates are the people who are kind of too crazy to get nominated as a Republican or Democrat. That may have been true in the past, but that's no longer the case. If anything, we're seeing some of the more extreme candidates running in the major parties, and the folks who are more focused on just getting things done and working together, they're the ones who are running as independents.
Jay, let's come to you. So in recent years, you served in our state government, leading the Hoosier State's response to the mental health and addiction crisis, and learned a great deal through that experience about the inner workings of government, in our state government, policymaking, and politics. Why'd you choose to get involved in independent Indiana specifically?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, Amar. And first of all, Nathan, thank you for your leadership, and it's been really inspiring to work with you on this. I would say, and so I have a couple of my former, partners with me here today, Brandon George and Senator Hundley. I think both of us worked together on the behavioral health reform in this state, and got a lot done in this building to make mental health and addiction better for Hoosiers of all kinds. And kind of the biggest aha moment for me when leading that charge was that it's not the fault of any individual actor within the system. Like, it truly is not. Like, we started out thinking we got to have this provider has to be better, or this system needs to be better, and you realize, like, very, very quickly When you're dealing with a broken system, blaming individuals within that system or focusing on like one particular thing is just not a recipe for sustained success or sustained reform, right? And so when you apply that lens to politics, there's a lot of excitement about this race or that race, and then you realize if you wake up on election day and the result of this one race is different, like nothing fundamentally will have changed about the sort of state of our politics, and those same incentives that Nathan talked about will still be there. And so what really attracted me to this, and the reason I'm here, is partly because of Nathan's leadership and partly because of like every single person I talked to about this idea was like, this is incredible, you should do it. But more importantly, the need to make sort of structural reforms to this system is much more important. And then you think about and then Nathan mentioned humility. We also have to have some humility about that, because people tend to go straight to like, we need to get money out of politics, or sort of like these really, really sort of aggressive big swings, which, to be clear, like I agree with, but that requires a constitutional amendment. Like that's not going to happen. And then you think about other efforts to promote independent candidates. What have they done? The Forward Party, those sorts of things. They've all tried to do like national things, right? And it's really hard to do anything at that scale. So what I love about this effort is it's homegrown, it's grassroots, it's bottom up, and it attracts the kind of structural drivers that we all sort of feel frustration about, but until very recently have not had the language to put a name to.
Thank you, Jay. Nathan, let's come back to you. So building on Jay's point that this isn't necessarily a problem of solo actors, sole elected officials. There is a structural set of problems here that are incentivizing the types of behaviors we see in our policymaking and in our politics. Could you say a bit more, or could you make it very, very clear? There was incredible data and rigorous analysis that you went through, but if you were to convey to the audience, here are the key punchlines of the root cause issues and the root cause solutions that we ought to consider taking on over the next year, couple years. Restate those for us, please.
Well, look, I think the biggest thing is, in a lot of races in the state, it's not a choice between two parties. It's one party. And then there may be a second candidate, but there really is not competition. And, I had a conversation with someone yesterday who worked in communications for several Republican governors in the past. And this person said, it's really interesting what you're talking about, because really at the root of it is you want people to be able to have a real choice when they go to the voting booth in November. And there's a lot of people who look at choice in terms of economics, and that if somebody doesn't have a choice when they're making a purchasing decision, they do not have a certain amount of freedom or liberty. And the reality is what you're talking about is flagging the fact that if we don't have choices on election day, we really are not free. We do not have the full liberty that so many people fought and died for over the last 250 years in this country. And I think that people are starting to wake up to that fact, but it really put in stark terms to me that this is an issue about every single Hoosier's freedom. And that's part of what motivates us. It's part of what gets me up every morning. The other thing is, in conversations that I have had with current elected officials from both major parties, they also see these problems. They also understand that competition makes them better. And one of the things that I'm so proud of is our study has a full section where we talk to a sitting Republican state legislator, a sitting Republican mayor, a sitting Democratic state legislator. And in exchange for their candor, we allow them to speak off the record about what's really happening inside their parties. And I really encourage you to, if nothing else, read that section of the study. Some of these comments I think will shock you. I want to share with you two quotes from this state legislator, the Republican state legislator. The first is, this person said, Mike Braun's cooked his goose with the House and Senate. He just can't tell the truth, and he can't read the room. This is the person who is leading our state and who ostensibly is going to be working with Republican and hopefully Democratic members of the House and Senate to solve our problems in the next 3 years. This person also said, the Indiana Republican Party I once knew is on life support. They understand the challenge the starkness of our situation, and many of them are privately encouraging us to return competition. The other thing is the Democratic state legislator we spoke with characterized the Indiana Democratic Party as the Internet Explorer of parties, that they are so far behind, that they have so much to catch up on, and it is just really daunting. And also some of the Democratic insiders that we spoke with just mentioned the fact that the party is really struggling to be competitive absent people who have family legacies as elected officials. We all know that Bo Bai is running for Secretary of State, but the two members of Congress that the Democrats have in the state, Andre Carson's grandmother Julia held his seat before he did, and Frank Mervan's father was a longtime senator up in that region, a state senator. And Frank may have benefited from a little name ID because Frank's dad's name is also Frank Mervan. So that's the situation that we're in.
And so at Independent Indiana and the Center for Independent and Effective Government, we aren't just problem definers, though we try to understand problems with depth and rigor. We are seeking solutions. We are problem solvers, right? So Nathan, over the next year, over the next couple of years, what solutions ought we be pursuing in our policymaking? And we have state legislator here in the audience and elected officials. We have civil society leaders that have been involved for decades here in Central and elsewhere in Indiana. We have a former mayor in the audience. List goes on. What solutions should we be targeting? And what can everyday citizens, no matter their background or station, what could they be doing to help?
So I'm glad that you mentioned those people that are here today, and obviously there's others who are not, who we've been talking to. The recommendations that we have in the study came out of conversations with those types of people. This has been informed by people who have worked in state and local government, who understand sort of how the sausage is made and what's realistic and what's not. The number one thing is for us to focus on repealing straight ticket voting. There is... It's hard for people to come up with a really good argument to keep it. I'll just put it that way. And I'm talking to people from both parties. My email address is very publicly available. I hope that some state legislators reach out and contact us. And if they say, look, you can be more helpful behind the scenes, then we will work behind the scenes to build a coalition. If they want us out front leading the charge, we will do that. But we want to connect all those folks who said that they thought straight ticket voting was a bad thing and are polling with those legislators and work together, because we saw in this state house last week, it works. The system still works when people stand up, when they make their voices heard, when they let people know that they want elections to be fair. Our legislators understand that and they listen to them. So there's that. The second piece, obviously, is to return the signature requirement back to that pre-1980 level. I hope that former Representative Mitch Harper will help us with that. He's already been leading the charge for many years on that as well. And then the other thing is helping to form that infrastructure for these independent candidates. We're really excited to today announce a toolkit that we're making available on our website for people considering running as independent candidates. This is the time of year when people are starting to make those decisions. And so in conjunction with our study release, we're going to be putting out that toolkit for them as well.
Jay?
Yeah, I'll just sort of maybe in closing, just sort of say two things. One, this is stuff that has forever been in the province of sort of democracy nerds, right? Like, nobody cares about this kind of stuff has always been the message. Like, nobody cares about
signature requirements,
voting, signature requirements, all that stuff. Right. Nobody cares about redistricting, right? Like that. But we saw the absolute firestorm and really the power of the people in beating that back. And it's something that I think if you asked somebody 5 years ago, they would have thought lived in that kind of world of just sort of politics nerds and nobody else cares. I think that's demonstrably not true. And then, just kind of the last thing, Hemingway talked about bankruptcy as sort of happening, gradually then all at once, right? And my view of this movement right now is we're in the gradual phase, but I think that all of once is coming, and I think that would encourage folks to join us and to make that moment come sooner.
Yeah, please go to our website, independentindiana.org. There's a place to join. There's a place to sign up for email updates. As Jay said, this is a movement that hopefully is going to keep growing, and we're going to need as many people as possible to help move our state forward and return competitive elections to a place that we all love so much.
Nathan, Jay, thank you so much.
Thanks. And thanks to everybody for coming.